All right, everyone, we might make a start. Hello and good morning. My name is Apu and I'm the Injury Prevention Officer here at Injury Matters. And I'm so excited to be facilitating this webinar today, which will look at the urban environment and explore ways we can advocate for safer WA by addressing key urban design strategies to make our environment safer and healthier for everyone. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in today and taking the time out of your busy schedules to build your knowledge and awareness around how to make urban environments safer. Today, I'm facilitating this webinar from Whadjuk Noongar land. So I'd like to acknowledge the Whadjuk Noongar people, the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm facilitating this webinar today, and pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and their leaders emerging. Australia always was and always will be Aboriginal land. I would love to know where you all are tuning in from today, so please do use the chat box to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land you're tuning in from. Before we start, I want to go over a few housekeeping points. Can everyone please double check that their microphones are muted? This will allow everyone to hear the presenter clearly. We'd also love to hear your questions, so we strongly encourage you to please send them through in the Q&A box below, and we will go through them at the end of the presentation. If you have more than one person in the room with you listening in to today's webinar, we would appreciate it if you could please send us a quick private message via the chat tab to let us know how many people are listening in with you. Also, if you face any technical issues during the presentation, please write them in the chat box and we will do our best to help you. I have Joe helping me here today with some admin stuff. And also this webinar is recorded. So a bit about Injury Matters. We are for safer people and places. Injury Matters aims to prevent and reduce the impact of injury within the WA community. We do this through advocating and providing education for injury prevention, as well as providing support for people who have been impacted by injury. Today's webinar is delivered via our No Injury program with the support of the WA Department of Health. No Injury is a statewide program which aims to enhance the capacity of injury prevention and safety promotion practitioners to deliver quality injury prevention activities. Via the No Injury program, we provide training events, resources, and networking opportunities to support injury prevention across the sector. Given the diversity of injury in WA, the program involves a variety of injury topics. However, today we're going to focus on the topic of urban environment. According to the World Health Organization, road traffic accidents are predicted to become the 5th leading cause of disease globally by the year 2030. Studies also show that places that tend to have more available public transit, particularly rail transit, tended to have lower incidences of injuries. Some good examples are Amsterdam and Paris. So given Australia's growing burden of disease, its aging population, and the role that regular physical activity has in managing and reducing the risk factors of many preventable diseases, the design and management of the built environment of where we live, work, and play is a significant means of promoting regular physical activity and reducing the risk of injury. By addressing the design of our streets and communities from the strategic planning levels of state or metropolitan plans, planners and other built environment professionals play an important role in improving the health of the people who live in these communities. Where public streets have been designed to serve primarily or even exclusively to promote private motor vehicle traffic, they can be made immensely safer for all users if they're designed to effectively serve pedestrians, public transport users, bicyclists, and other public activities. So to further elaborate on this, I would like to introduce you all to Ben Haddock, who is the Future Mobility Lead Designer for Arup. Ben focuses on connecting energy, transport, and the environment across Australasia, and is particularly active in the low emission mobility space, working on policy development and implementation of projects across the UK and Australasia. He has more than 20 years experience managing and delivering transport projects across the world. leading multidisciplinary teams, collaborating with local authorities, transport authorities, architectural partners, planners, and other technical specialists, Ben is hugely passionate about sustainable, safe, and inclusive places for all. So I'd like to hand over to Ben. I'll just stop sharing. And Ben, you can start sharing now.
Hi, everybody. Hi, thanks for that, Apu. Great to see you all. Hopefully you can see my slides and you can't see my notes. That's good. All good. Yeah, great to be with you today. And I'm sat here on Wadjuk, Noongar land as well, so I pay my respect to elders past, present, and emerging. It's great to talk to you. And I'm going to talk to you about the urban environment and advocating for a safer WA. Key thing for me to know is I'm from the UK. I've been in Western Australia for 2 years, 2 and a bit years, and it's an incredible place to live and be. Some of the things that I've seen in Western Australia baffle my mind with the beauty and space and place that we have naturally in this space. But we started to adapt it to suit humans for quite a long time, and some of the decisions that have been made in past and current are helping us to create unsafe spaces. And what I want to help us all to do is advocate to make WA a safer space with the natural environment and the built environment that we can create. So I work for Arup, a global design firm that has a single shared ownership. We all work for ourselves. We all work for each other. We don't work with shareholders, and we deliver interesting projects all around the world, including here in Western Australia. I'm going to talk to you about mobility futures and the context of future mobility and how people are going to travel, how you are going to travel in future. Design influences, what has changed, and what is happening in transport and urban planning across Australasia and the world today. What can WA change? I'm going to talk you through the economics of good urban environments that are safer for everybody. And I'm going to look at the awareness needed in urban planning across industry and the confidence to talk and advocate for a safer Western Australia. And then we'll have a bit of a Q&A session. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from you. So mobility futures and the broader context. How are we going to travel in future? How are the next generation going to interact with public space? Are they going to be safer? Are they going to be less safe? Something to really think about as we progress with our transport choices moving forward. Cities all over the world are rethinking who will soon be using their streets and how. Streets and places that are connected, shared, electric, have a greater interaction with place and are exciting. Using smart technology to improve energy efficiency, geofencing places and improve performance, new constructs of ownership, better accessibility, autonomous movement, and connections to that environment. Impacts on health of people and place. That's the future of mobility. Societal and technological change will revolutionize how we travel in the coming decades. And it's happening today. I saw just yesterday the first set of trials within the metro area in City of Stirling for e-scooters. We now have a policy on e-ridables in Western Australia that are trying to look at and help people be safer with this new technology. But future mobility is connected to everything else as well. So we have to think about inclusive neighborhoods. We have to think about active mobility, reducing the need to travel through digitally connectivity, livable 15-minute neighborhoods designed around active transport, avoiding those health issues. A shift, low carbon, sustainable shared mobility, enabling that modal shift to equitable public transport and shared mobility. Public transport will always be the backbone of a future mobility system. Improved connectivity, connected mobility, ultra-low emission vehicles, autonomous vehicles is an improvement on our current existing transport habits. It's not a fundamental shift in how we change. You have to look at all three of avoidance, shifting, and improving to travel behavior. So what's happened recently? People's mobility habits have changed dramatically during the pandemic. That link between health and how you travel is much clearer to the general public. That link between your health, your well-being, and the outdoors is much clearer during the pandemic. Across Australia, we saw a 63% increase in cycling activity during COVID-19 restrictions, pretty much last year. A large uptake in local trips and the home environment, being around the place that you live, connecting to that environment, walking to the shops, cycling with your family and your children to different environments that you may never have before. But it's not all rosy. 29% of public transport users used to achieve more than 30 minutes of exercise every day. Walking to the bus, walking to the train station, cycling to the train station to travel to work. That 30 minutes of exercise perhaps was lost. How many of you have sat watching Netflix after work rather than going for a walk or going for a cycle that you would have done if you were at your place of work? Something to consider as we think about safer environments. So how safe is the future? When we think of new streets, what has been happening in the last 10 years or so with designing our spaces and places in cities? But with change comes risk. How safe is the future? If you can see the cable here strung across to a new mobility pod that's charging it from a lamppost. Imagine if I was a cyclist traveling along there, or using one of the new e-scooters on street, scattered across the street, causing hazardous environments for people with mobility impairments. Perhaps this is creating inattentive drivers too. Perhaps the risk of your perception of risk is changing because everything you feel in your car is safer. That's exactly what's happening in Australia. 4 in 5 Australians admit to breaking a road law. 39% with the most common excuse include not paying attention. It's quite startling. A brief lapse in judgment or simply believing it was safe to do so. Is that correct? Equitable? How is technology adapting to this change? We hear about the change of vehicles. They're getting safer. You can have automated systems in the car that keep you within your lane, automated braking, systems that can help and aid the driver or the people contained within that metal box, not necessarily the urban environment around us. Here is one of those examples, a well-known major vehicle manufacturer. This is their concept of connected, shared, and autonomous mobility. Aren't they incredible examples of technological innovation? It's addressing the need of improving road safety. This is an autonomous pod. It drives by itself, potentially reducing up to 60 to 70% of all fatal accidents. It can help reduce congestion and accessibility. It's thought that within an urban area, autonomous vehicles can improve city congestion. Further ownership models could reduce car dependency. You don't need to own one of these pods. It can pick you up and drop you off at your front door. But what else do you see in this picture? Perhaps it's a lack of diversity, inaccessible costs, enabling a technology-dependent future, more options for the wealthy and affluent, and perhaps a challenge in the places that we create, perhaps a future we won't see, perhaps for all of us, it's a future we don't want. Here's an example of current mobility. This is a bus stop in South London, so credit to my colleagues in Transport for London for this picture. This bus stop is serviced regularly from Future Mobility. It's serviced by zero emission buses, electric buses, and mobility as a service, demand responsive transport, providing access to places and accessible to many. But is this a safe place? Is this an equitable place? How will technology improve their journeys and health? Perhaps we need to break out of that stranglehold that technology has on us and think about who benefits from that technology, innovation, and how. Think about design of spaces, the urban environment, and how we can make those safer so everybody can travel in a safe and equitable way. So I'll move on to design and the influence of urban design and transport planning on people. Your feeling and perception of place is coming more into design choices that we take globally. Traditionally, urban design, placemaking, reserved for the high traffic public realm areas, but that's not fitting the bill from a safety or perception of safety perspective. We need to bring safety into every street conversation, every road conversation, every place conversation. And there's a global shift. We're advocating for a safer WA, but the rest of the world is advocating too. There's a tremendous amount of design, material, strategies, thought leadership that has gone on in the last 10 years. Even here in Australia, with Melbourne in particular leading the way with certain street designs. Toronto, over in Canada, Complete Streets Guidelines, the NACTO Design Guidelines, Urban Bikeway Design Guidelines, Adelaide Design Manual. We all have a similar concept of bringing place into the design of our streets, thinking about the user, thinking about the opportunities that a better street environment for that user could create. But what are we doing nationally? The National Road Safety Strategy has a 2050 vision zero target, 0 deaths or serious injuries by 2030. 0 deaths of children 7 years and under. 0 deaths in city CBD areas. And why? 1,200 people die on Australia's roads every year. Serious injuries are increasing, and there's a significant shift in the amount of people being inattentive when they are driving. We have to work towards a more multimodal orientated streets and spaces that bring the attention back to drivers. So what else are we doing? What do safer urban roads and streets look and feel like? We have to acknowledge that human bodies are vulnerable. We have a shared responsibility to look after each other, and people make mistakes. So how can we make our urban spaces safer? Safe systems thinking need to be aligned with movement and place to inform the types of interventions on the future roads and streets in different urban environments. We have to make intersections safer. We have to have safer speeds on local roads, safer roads for all road users, traffic calming, and safe street layouts. I'm going to step through an example of how we can transition an existing space that's very car dominated, car orientated, and an unfriendly, unsafe environment to something that's connected to the future of mobility and safer spaces. So here it is. It's not in Western Australia. This is in Melbourne. I'd love to do an example of a street in Western Australia. So if someone has an example, please let me know and I'll go and study it. So this is today. This is what it looks like. Lots of cars, lots of car parking, a very unhealthy, unsafe environment for everybody. How can we create a different space? So how can we bring future mobility into this space at the same time? We can add public Wi-Fi, we can add sensors, we can start to think about the example of the space and use the data that we collect to inform business cases. How do we transition the space? Can we add, as we are doing in lots of cities in Australia, protected cycleway infrastructure, removing car parking, creating a safer environment for a particular road user. But what next? What's coming in next? Cycleway, bike hire, potential autonomous transport, connections to public transport. How do we transition that space? What you can see here is we've brought greenery, nature back into the street as well. That creates a safer environment, a cleaner environment, a less hot environment too. Grass, trees, the enhancement of that place. The through movement is still there, but car parking has been removed. Can we bring the surface in a different environment? Can we remove cars altogether from that particular street? There's still residential car parking on this street, but it's not interacting with the rest of the modes. It's not connecting with the rest of the modes. We've got shared surface, seating, greenery, bike racks. Is this an environment that could work? It's also flexible. Could this space be used for a cafe, for a playground, integrating children into the environment? Would you let a child play in that street today? And here's examples of some of the interventions created in that street to transition it from an unfriendly, unsafe, car-dominated environment to something that children perhaps could play in. And it's children that I want to focus on now for the rest of my presentation. Here's a great quote from the Mayor of Bogota. Children are a kind of indicator species. If we can build a successful city for children, we will have a successful city for all people. And by 2050, 70% of the world's population will live in cities, and the majority of these residents will be under the age of 18. Perth here in Western Australia has a target to get to 3.5 million people living in the Perth and Peel metro area. Hence, we will have more children growing up in cities than ever before. Children like us want for the same things: safe and clean streets, access to green space, clean air, things to do, ability to get around, freedom to see friends, and somewhere to call home. This is something that I find quite interesting as a transport planner, and as we've heard earlier today about planning for interested but concerned groups, working towards looking at people with disabilities, mobility impairments, gender balance in our streets. Perhaps we need to look at children as that indicator species for all. We're not talking about one mode of travel. We're talking about a whole successful city, our whole successful urban places. We're talking about actually achieving that all ages and abilities outcome in our designs and making them safe so that you can allow a child to travel in a street unhindered. Thinking also about the statistics I presented earlier and the local global drivers. The focus is often on the aging population. Often we respond by separating the needs of young and old. Are we looking at that right? Perhaps they're together. Perhaps the needs of the young and the elderly are similar. Surely a healthy, happy elderly need healthy, happy young people too, and being inclusive. So what are the core challenges of urban childhoods? They are often generally built environments, challenges faced around the world experienced by many different groups. But prioritizing children's perspectives is about looking at what affects young people most and research shows that this approach has been an answer to all of them. So here are the core challenges: traffic and pollution, crime, social fears, risk aversion, isolation and intolerance, high-rise living and urban sprawl, inadequate and unequal access. By establishing a child well-being focus, it gives us a great perspective on positive outcomes for these challenges. Arup did a piece of research and published a paper a few years ago on urban childhoods. I really hope you can get the time to read it. It's got some really interesting interventions, recommended advocacy pieces to our state government, federal government, local government representatives who have an influence on our streets. Some interventions include multifunctional green infrastructure, wild spaces, construction sites that are safe, multi-use community, speed controls, traffic measures, pedestrian priority, community gardens, play streets, playable spaces, neighborhood mapping. A big challenge for this research that Arup undertook was the amazing amount of work academics, researchers, charities had already done and making it relevant. Projects try and bring about that change, but sometimes get too focused on the academics of the opportunity, rather than showing what a simple solution could be. I'm going to talk you through a real simple solution for child-friendly spaces. I'm going to highlight an example that shows simple solutions that do not have cost prohibitive or do not have to be cost prohibitive, but may require some thought within the planning process. And we have the opportunity to empower and engage on this in our discussions with our stakeholders. And it's up to all of us here to advocate for a safer WA. So here we have a little girl in an urban environment. She's quite happy. She's playing. She's enjoying the space. Nothing tells people that a place is safe and welcoming more than a child playing. So why is she doing it? And what is she doing? She's identified a line in the pavement. Children observe and experience the environment around them in finer detail, seeking out opportunities to play. It's nature playing tricks on us. We enjoy doing things that are good for us, learning sense of balance, sense of achievement through playful exploration. Not just the children. Parents are stopped socializing, good for well-being, longer dwell time, possible economic benefits, spending more, perhaps there's a cafe nearby, a ripple effect on how that urban environment has changed. Simple outcome, providing public space not allocated to roads, resulting in a bigger impact. We as planners and designers need to consider how we can make things better for kids at each stage of the design process. It's up to us to influence and ask for these spaces and places to be created. But if we do that, I'm going to move into the third section now. Who benefits? Inclusion rather than the consideration of inclusion. This is my daughter, a picture of my daughter down at Margaret River last year, where we closed the street, bought a load of chalk, started drawing all over the street during a sort of festival and an environment around it. She benefits. I benefited. The space placing benefited. The businesses benefited from that street being closed. There was 3 times as many people on that street than there had ever been before. So what are some of the numbers? More than half of adults, 55%, didn't participate in sufficient physical activity. 2 in 3 children, aged 2 to 17, do not meet their physical activity and sedentary behavior guidelines. There's a 36% reduction in harmful emissions at street level by limiting access to urban places by polluting cars. We have to create a cleaner environment. One real startling statistic from the COVID-19 pandemic was that we saw a 29% increase in cyclist fatalities, and that's not commensurate with the uptick in cycling that we'd seen throughout the pandemic. The only road user group to experience an increase in fatalities. So it suggests that some of our infrastructure and our environment and our attitude towards other modes when people are driving is about creating unsafe environments for us. But what about the economics? In half of short vehicle trips, 1 kilometre or less, were converted to walking, there would be a 2.4 million fewer vehicle trips each week in Melbourne. This is a piece of research Arup undertook with Victoria Walks in Melbourne. I'd love to do a piece of research here in Western Australia that looks at the same thing. Investment in walking infrastructure can provide a higher economic return than other transport projects. So creating safer spaces for more people to travel creates a better economic return than investing in road infrastructure. I'll just let that one sink in for a minute. If we invest $1 in walking infrastructure, in active mode infrastructure, we can get up to $13 economic benefit in return. Typically, a road project is less than $1 return. Walking has been overlooked as a potential investment and underplayed in city shaping projects. If we invest in the infrastructure to walk, to play, to have child-friendly cities, we will have a better economic outcome as well as a safer environment. The amount of time children spend playing outdoors, their ability to get around independently, and their level of contact with nature are strong indicators of how a city is performing, not just for children, but for all generations of city dwellers. If cities fail to address the needs of children, they risk economic and cultural impacts as families move away. Considering how we design cities better has wider benefits. Focusing on children, therefore, acts as a unifying theme to navigate complex challenges and to gain support for interventions. So health and well-being, physical activity, fostering the opportunity for independent mobility does long-term benefits to them and society. Safety, active streets, reduced speed, safe routes around schools, homes, stronger communities, social interaction and accessibility, enabling children to experience every day as part of a community. It's a catalyst. We can use children as an enabler to change our spaces, make them safer, stronger communities. Arup undertook some research last year into inclusive cycling in Australia and here in Perth. Some quotes from that research from lobbying groups and people interested in cycling were, we have to think about inclusion and actually do inclusion, bring people to the table, get people on the consultation boards, think about health impacts of investment decisions in our infrastructure, in our urban places. So really inclusion rather than consideration for inclusion. We need better resources and training for designers. Those that cycle must endanger themselves and or be very experienced to be able to cycle. That's a quote that really hurts. Some of the data from that research, hopefully you can see some of these statistics. How inclusive is cycling in your area? 53% of respondents note that cycling in their area is not inclusive, yet 39% say it is not inclusive at all. So how relevant are these recommendations to inclusivity in cycling? There's a high relevance from the respondents for language and cost, but a proportion perceive that free training is not relevant or are unsure for welcoming people to cycle. So would training people to cycle in our unsafe environments help them? People are saying no, the environment needs to change. So how can we change our environment? How can we advocate for a safer WA? Urban design and place strategies that help reduce injury in WA. Here are some strategies to advocate for, noting that the Western Australia state government is looking at safer streets, safer places, a movement and place framework. Healthy streets. This is an evidence-based and a holistic framework that is useful to both professionals and community for improving the standard of street environments and evaluating the performance. The Healthy Streets approach is aligned with the Heart Foundation's Active by Design guidance and can also assist in describing and measuring place and movement. Adopting a Healthy Streets framework would assist greatly in achieving greater collaboration between designers, authorities, and achieve better outcomes for the community. Some of the indicators to create healthy streets and spaces could be they're easy to cross, places to stop and rest, places that are not too noisy. People choose to walk. People feel safe. We have clean air. There are things to see and do. This is not a prescriptive set of design requirements. This is not a safety audit checklist. This is a evidenced and holistic framework that allows us to design healthier streets. And I really recommend that we think about this for Western Australian streets. But also, what else can we do? Can we create emotive language? Can we use emotive language? Can we change the narrative of our streets? Can we work with the designers? Can we work with the state government? Can we work with local government representatives and advocate for people being safer? How many people are you willing to see hurt by your scheme? That's quite emotive. It's quite hard. But the statistics can prove that investment in road infrastructure that doesn't consider all users, that isn't considered safe, can create accidents and incidents and injury and death. Big change is possible through small coordinated interventions that may be scaled up and adapted to different contexts. This is a toolkit that Arup have helped develop with Centre for Cities around the world. The toolkit also developed a set of primers to give people the confidence to approach planning or design reviews, to put their ideas on the table. It breaks it down into city leaders and policymakers. What can we advocate for? For developers and investors, what can we advocate for? And for built environment professionals, what can we advocate for? And as health professionals on this call today, I'd suggest we can advocate for all 15. We can have an awareness that something should be done, but we don't know what to do or where to start. What is good practice? This framework allows us to break that down. I see this as a conversation starter. Some practical things that you can do, including first steps, quick wins. For example, an action or an opportunity for a planner or an engineer, looking at how we design our walkable environment that facilitate longer dwell times, increased actual perceived safety, cater for different age groups. Could use this framework to suggest, who do I need to talk to make that decision? Who do I need to talk to get the investment to invest in that outcome? Or for city leaders, considering how to integrate child-friendly criteria into procurement, this framework can help. Does this then help give a prompt to address the risks of unconscious bias in our designs? Is it something we've always done, that we have as adults? We need to think about children. What do they need? What do they want? It is more than the everyday freedoms that they seek. They want safe spaces, and we need to address it holistically in planning and design. So I'm going to give you 4 key advocacy priorities, noting that the Australian Society for Physical Activity have just published a federal paper lobbying for 3 transport priorities. It's a little bit narrow in its focus, with a focus on speed, funding for e-ridables and school environments. But do go check that one out. But the 4 that I want to put to you today are to make it clear that transport and health are directly linked. We need safer routes to schools, for pedestrian spaces, and create a priority for active transport in our streets. The economics of healthy choices do work. Business cases can be formed around broader benefits. You can invest in safer spaces without impacting place. We need better resources for WA designers. Let's get on with the adoption and mandate a movement and place methodology. Bring lived experiences to the table. Consult widely and broadly to understand perception for all. We have tools that allow us to visualize space and a problem before it's even real. What's happened to you? Talk in the emotive. How many people would your scheme hurt? How do we create a safer environment for everybody in WA. I'll move on to the Q&A now, Apu, if we want to, but just flag up here, and hopefully you'll get this slide deck for you all to have a read on. There's some further reading. Some of the documents I referenced there as I spoke. Designing for urban childhoods as a guideline, inclusive cycling, and cleaner air benefits. Please do have a read. So Apu, I'll stop sharing and we can have Q&A.
Just a reminder that these slides will be shared in a follow-up email, so you will get the links to all of the reports and stuff that are linked on the slideshow. And I'm going to start sharing mine. There's a couple of questions coming in. Give me 2 seconds. Whoops. So can you see my notes at all?
Nope.
No, okay, cool. So we've got a question from Kristen Jameson. So she's from KidSafe WA. And she's asking, what are your thoughts on shade in urban environments, specifically playgrounds for children? Do you think there is opportunity to make shade structures mandatory in public playgrounds or in school playgrounds? It just seems that there's no mandates there in WA, and obviously heat is an issue and increased risk of skin cancer. So yeah, what are your thoughts on that one?
It's a really good question, and thanks for that. I think a mandate is going to be hard for me to advocate for. One thing I would say is that shade doesn't necessarily have to be provided by structure. Shade can be provided by the environment, and the best shading piece of infrastructure that we can put in are trees. So the key thing is looking at the design of spaces. Shade structures are really important, and obviously the risk of getting exposed to the sun too much is really key. I've got 2 kids, I understand. And myself, I'm from Northern England. I stay out in the sun too long and I go bright red. But the key is it doesn't have to be shade structure. We can look at the environment in a natural way. We can use trees, different forms of nature to create that shaded space. I think we should advocate for shade, but not necessarily shade structures.
Yep, good point. There's a few more questions, but I had a question myself. So there's obviously in Melbourne, I've read recently that they've done the whole rollout of the Lime scooters, and that didn't really go according to plan. What is like, do you have opinions about that? Are there certain strategies that just don't work in certain communities and cities?
I've got numerous opinions on e-scooters, and I love them. I love traveling on them. I think Western Australia is set up really well to encourage them. Our sort of inter-urban principal share path network is excellent and it's growing. And the DOT in particular, I've got lots of plans to make that grow. And when you have a 4-meter wide share path that's designed for 30 kph or beyond, the scooters are reasonably safe themselves, but interacting with other modes, interacting with pedestrians, interacting with cars, etc., is a real unsafe environment if we don't consider speed. Yeah. And that's the biggest issue of it all, is speed. In terms of the rollout and them getting scattered all over the pavements and chucked in the river and all sorts of other things, there are lots of different tools and techniques that can help with that environment. And one critical piece is user education and user acceptance of the fact that it's not yours, and you need to be able to look after it as if it was yours, which is that shared ownership model, which we're all adapting to. And it's not just fixed to scooters. It's about Uber and other mobility as a service platforms.
Thank you. And I guess moving on from that, how do we build on the stuff that's already going on in WA, the Safe Active Streets program and the PSP network? These are 2 that are, Matthew McLaughlin is asking what's currently going on in WA and how we can work with the stuff that we already have.
Yeah, so I'll address the PSP program, and obviously I don't work for the DOT, so I can't, or Main Roads or anybody, so I can't really say exactly what they're doing, so I can't suggest that this is exactly what's happening. But certainly the PSP network is getting expanded. So there was an adoption for the majority of local governments in Western Australia on a sort of principal shared path network, and sort of the broader connecting shared paths that would cut through local government areas. So expanding that PSP network. So currently it kind of covers the majority of major highways, follows, Kwinana Freeway or other freeways through Perth. There's obviously that next level, that long-term cycle network plan that the DOT have done to connect into that, and really leverage the opportunity that WA has with great weather, great environment for cycling, and really push it. So that's on growth, and that's a multi-agency development plan that the DOT are obviously looking after at the moment. In terms of safe active streets, some of the test sites have gone really well, some of them haven't, as far as I'm aware. So that there's a lot of learnings from those trials to see what could work where and what couldn't. And sometimes safe active streets are all about the commitment. So building the case, making the case for that investment. They're more expensive than the existing platform. Should they be more expensive? That's a bigger question. But hopefully we can learn what went wrong, what went right in some of the trials, and grow them in our spaces. One thing I would say is, should there be a safe active street around every single primary school in Western Australia? I would advocate for a yes.
Yeah. And lastly, Matthew is wondering what you are currently working on in WA. What are the current projects?
Oh, it's a significant amount. We have a contract with the Department of Transport looking at long-term cycle network planning from Point Walter down to Rockingham, which is really interesting as a project and how we connect into that and create safer spaces. That's one project. Another project with the City of Perth and Department of Transport looking at the City Deal funding for active transport improvements in the CBD. So we're looking at those improvements and where we can invest. In terms of broader advocating for health outcomes, I'm looking at the future mobility strategies for Southwest Group councils, so City of Fremantle, Coburn, Kwinana, Melville, Rockingham. Looking at electric vehicle strategies and how that can be multimodal, not just about encouraging people to buy an electric car to replace their existing diesel car. What else could it be? Could it be equitable? So that's one. Really interesting stuff.
Yeah, very interesting to see what's going on out there as well, and what you personally are working on. So thank you. I might just wrap it up now, unless there's, everyone's just kind of saying how useful your presentation was. So thank you, Ben.
Oh, good.
So just to, oh, why is it not working? There you go. So in terms of further training and events with Injury Matters, just keep a keen eye on our website for upcoming events and trainings. They're always updated, and so just keep an eye out. There's a link there for you guys. And in terms of next steps to how to keep the conversation going, we'd encourage you all to join the Injury Prevention Network. The Injury Prevention Network meets quarterly to provide professionals such as yourselves working in the injury prevention space. I've lost myself. Across WA with an opportunity to connect with each other to share learnings and solutions in injury prevention and safety promotion. If you want to sign up, just send me an email and I'll add you to the network. We also have an evaluation survey that pops up after this webinar will end. We'd really value your feedback, so please share your thoughts and future webinar training topics that you want covered. And 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 register to Connected. Connected is our online networking program for professionals working in the injury prevention space. It is a networking program where participants are randomly paired bi-monthly to have a 15-minute conversation with another health professional working in the injury prevention space. As you can see, there's a really cute picture of Michelle and Kristen meeting up and chatting over a coffee. And yeah, it's a really great space. You can use a QR code on the screen there or the link that will be shared as well. And yeah, that's about it for today. Thank you all for being so interactive and asking questions. And thank you, Ben, for your wonderful presentation. I feel like we all learned a lot and learned how we all as health professionals can advocate for better built environments. So thank you.